Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our fourth segment of the day, our one and only college football segment of the day, transitioning from the NFL games with huge fantasy implications to now the college football ones. And the four that I've compiled here, very, very interesting games. I feel like two of them are a little bit off kilter, and two of them are huge SEC matchups that could be playoff eliminators. A lot of them involve some key players in key situations for their teams. So look for this to be a very rich fantasy weekend for you from that perspective. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off with a huge group of five game actually taking place tonight. Boise State, UNLV could be the marbles game. I like to say that any game such as this is a marbles game because it's for all of them. This is perhaps the matchup that determines the group of five conference champion that's going to make it to the CFP. And not for nothing, these two teams are offensively well equipped to really make this a true fantasy shootout here, on the field and off. And if you have any one of these players who I'm going to talk about, look for them to truly be the stars. Boise State, it's the one and only Ashton Jeanty. I feel like, from what I hear of his journey, he's someone who's dedicated himself to sticking with an identity, sticking with one program. His decision to stay with Boise State is paying dividends. It's giving them the national profile of a team that you might not expect to see in the national spotlight as much, or in this era of football, of college football especially. But he's doing it in such a way that is so unequivocally dominant that you have to respect what he means for college football and what he means for fantasy college football, because this is the type of player who, if you're not necessarily interested in fantasy college football, makes you interested, catches your eye. This is a guy who has already 17 touchdowns, over 1,200 yards this season. And he still has, 6 games to play, including tonight's. So look for him to be someone who, for this one season in fantasy college football, and for many seasons thereafter in the NFL, as someone who's just that it factor for your fantasy team. Or, if you're someone who's a little bit more ambitious and is in a dynasty league, he's your RB1 as soon as he enters the league. And that's why I feel like this game for him is perhaps one we truly know what he brings to not just fantasy sports, but to the entire fantasy landscape for the next decade. Because that is a dynasty type player in this matchup at a school such as Boise State that's not been getting that much attention over the past couple of years. On the UNLV side of things, they've been getting a lot of attention, sometimes for the wrong reasons. Of course, the whole NIL drama with Matthew Sluka. Now, Malik Williams, the former Camel, stepping in to the QB role and hasn't missed a beat. I feel like this team has a lot of explosive talent. I like Ricky White, their receiver, a lot. They have a very deep receiver room as well. But I do think that the problem I see with UNLV is that they don't necessarily have the defensive resources to account for what Jeanty brings to the table. While I do think that Malik Williams and Ricky White are a nice connection, nice stack in fantasy terms, I do believe that the UNLV defense is going to be the reason why Ashton Jeanty is going to have as good a game as he is. And so that caveat there is a reason why I feel like UNLV will lose its luster in terms of a fantasy perspective. But I still think that Jeanty doesn't have to be the biggest story of this game. Malik Williams can prove himself in this game as well. It's just a matter of, how many times he gets to prove himself over a guy like Ashton Jeanty, because he's going to take up a lot of space in this one. We'll look for this to be an exciting Group of 5 game, potentially for all the marbles because of the stakes. But it should be a good one. Transitioning now to the SEC. Very intriguing matchup here between two undefeated conference teams looking to make a CFP run. The LSU Tigers and the Texas A&M Aggies. These are two offenses that are not the most appealing from a fantasy perspective, but have the big play in them. With LSU, you have Garrett Nussmeier and the talented crop of young receivers with Kyron Lacey and CJ Daniels. On the other side of things, with Texas A&M, they're playing ball control offense to a T right now. Making that transition from Marcel Reed, who you would suspect would be a kind of dual threat, big play kind of guy who will be really explosive in a fantasy setting, to Connor Wegman, you get now more of a balanced attack where Wegman kind of keeps this team on schedule but is not flashy in terms of stats, and Le'Veon Moss is the reason why they are such a fascinating fantasy team. So that's why I think that this matchup is so complicated to dissect from a fantasy standpoint, but could be very explosive. Because I love Garrett Nussmeier, perhaps out of all these QBs who are looking to become pro-ready, perhaps the most pro-ready. It sounds funny to say out of all of them. And I think he can prove it in this game against a very stout Texas A&M defensive front. The Texas A&M side of things, if their ball control offense is what it's going to be, then so be it. They are a team well equipped to completely out-physical SEC teams because their offensive side of the football knows its identity now. Their defense is one of the most potent in the country. And thus, that's why I feel like, I wouldn't be mad, if Connor Wegman didn't have as many yards as some other guys, but Le'Veon Moss carry the load. And so that's what I want to see. Both these teams to understand their identities, but also from a fantasy standpoint, to understand that it's not just about, putting up points. It's about putting up points efficiently. And so this game might anger a couple of fantasy managers in terms of those who have guys like Nussmeier and Moss, but it's still going to be a game that holds a lot of weight. But now let's get back to a game that has a lot of playoff stakes, but interestingly enough, for both teams now rather than just one. And this game is perhaps the most exciting it's been or ever going to be thus far to this point, and that is Notre Dame Navy. Boise State UNLV, like I said, could be the Group of 5 decider. But if Navy wins this football game, they are the only undefeated Group of 5 team outside of the other military service academy, Army, which could lead to huge college football playoff implications in that game as well. But first, they got to get through perhaps their only ranked opponent of the season, their only chance for a ranked win, should Army falter along the way or not be seen as someone who's had as good a schedule as Navy's in the long run. What I love about this game is that both of these offenses seem so starkly similar. Because for Navy, it's just 3 guys. Horvath holding down the option offense at quarterback, one of the top quarterbacks in the nation in terms of total QBR. Texa, the fullback, averaging 6.5 yards per carry, and Eli Heidenreich, who's averaging 200 yards per game at the running back position. Those are the 3 guys that hold the most weight in the system. On the other side of the football, I feel like it's centered around the importance of Riley Leonard in this attack because he's a dual threat guy, but I feel like in order for Notre Dame to realize its full potential, he's going to need to pass the football a little bit more. The question that remains, though, is who is going to pass the football to, because there's a lot of talent, but it's not necessarily the best talent in the nation for Riley Leonard to throw the football to. I like their tight end room. I love Mitchell Evans as their number 1 option, but Jaden Greathouse and some other guys there aren't necessarily going to be the guys to carry the load should Riley Leonard being more pass happy this week. Not for nothing, both of these defenses feel like they can falter a little bit in certain situations. Navy has not faced an offense as tricky as Notre Dame's, but Notre Dame has not faced a defense as physical as Navy's. So that's going to be the question. Which of these offenses can get the most out of their key men in this game? And I feel like that's where Navy might have the slight edge from a fantasy standpoint, but also in real life as well. Because this triple option is not just, your grandma's triple option, your grandpa's triple option. This is a modern triple option offense for Navy being run to a T by three fantastic players. So that's the challenge there. And the last one I want to discuss, Mizzou, Alabama. This is a game that still has a lot of talent, but two underwhelming teams at center at the end of the day. On the Mizzou side of things, I don't believe that Brady Cook has fully gotten up to speed at all this season. Yes, he had a game where he came back from the hospital to lead Missouri to that comeback. I forget who against. I'm going to have to look it up after. But he's still someone who I don't necessarily trust in this setting. On the Alabama side of things, they just rely too much on the explosive play. And I love that, Ryan Williams has been incorporated into this team. I love that Jeremy Bernard has found a home here after struggling to find time at Washington. But it's a team that still is too reliant on offense and the explosive play on defense, just lost a lot of its talent. And the same could be said of Missouri where, the offense has really been struggling and so has the defense. But the reason why this game still has a lot of fantasy upside is because of the fact that there are game wreckers all on the field. For Missouri, it's Luther Burden III. He's still one of the best receivers in the nation. And if Brady Cook can find a rhythm in this one, he can definitely be an X factor. And for Alabama, it's going to come down to, how much Jalen Milroe can operate out of structure. He's going to want to get vertical in the pass game. He's going to want to be explosive. But there's going to come a time where he might struggle against this Missouri defense. He's going to have to pick and choose his spots to exploit this Missouri secondary. But at the end of the day, I feel like that's the reason why I still hold a lot of weight in my mind when I think about this from a fantasy perspective. Because of the fact that I know what these two teams are capable of, and I know what their game records especially are capable of. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Coming up to close out the show, though, we go back to Sunday Night Football, a topic we discussed on yesterday's show. Just giving you some start-sit fantasy advice for this one to close out the show and the week of the show. The GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We'll be right back after this short break.